Welcome. I'm Tim Woodard, the 2023 Secretary for the National Association of Public Insurance Adjusters. Today, I would like to introduce member Benny Wright with Victory Claims and Ken Malcolmson, President and CEO with the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce.
Tim, thanks for having me on. Ken, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Benny, and great to see you.
Yeah, you too, man. So I'll tell you what, this was a fun event to work only because I got to help some of the people that I had networked with personally for a very long time. And so seeing those folks in need of something that I could provide them and kind of, save them from this distraction that they've just went through was a proud moment for me. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you for being here for our first interview series on the NAPIA Podcast. So
great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and great to see you both.
Yeah. So before we get into the details of that storm, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about the North Dallas Chamber and just how pivotal they are to the North Dallas community.
Well, that's nice of you to ask, Benny. But so my background is that I was a healthcare executive for 40 years, and I retired, and opportunity came up to actually contribute to the community in a much different way, and that is as the CEO of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce. North Dallas Chamber of Commerce has been around for 69 years, founded in 1954, and it's got a reputation for doing some really special things in this community. I'm not going to outline those in front of us, but the bottom line is that we do a great job relative to public advocacy, the programming, providing information and content to our members and our stakeholders, and at the same time we provide ample networking opportunities.
Well, and so you said you've been around for 69 years. Have you ever had to go through something like you did in 2019 before?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Most of our written history, which had not been digitized, is gone.
Yeah.
We lost that in the storm of 2019. But no, not that I'm aware of. I don't think we've ever had a catastrophic event like that.
So you talk about programming and all that. I want to make that a kind of a focal point here. You're a pretty busy guy running this association.
Well, thanks for saying that too. But yeah, we work real diligently to ensure that we have great exposure throughout the community. We have a saying that autonomy is the enemy. So we spend a lot of time collaborating with many of our partners in the community to ensure that we are more efficient in how we deliver our services and we amplify our voice.
Well, and I'm friends with you on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, and you're somewhere all the time with some very influential people in the area. So I know that takes up a lot of time, and I know that adds a lot of value to the members of the chamber. So I preface that only because if you're that busy, an insurance claim can be a real derailment for what your day-to-day operations are. Is that fair?
Absolutely, 100% fair. And that might be a good opportunity to step back and talk about what happened during the storm. But why don't you lead me there?
Yeah. So in 2019, October 19th, I remember it was a Sunday evening and the Cowboys were playing. There was a series of tornadoes that touched down in the North Dallas area, Preston Hollow district, for those that are familiar with the area. The strongest of the sorts was an EF3. And from what I have been told from reliable sources, this cost roughly $1.5 billion in area-wide damage, and it became the costliest tornado event in Texas state history, passing through some of the most populated areas in the Dallas market. Now, being very intimately familiar with the situation, you guys recently had a brand new building just months before this tornado hit town. Is that correct?
We did. We owned a piece of property, for anyone that's familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth area, at the southwest quadrant of Preston and Royal in Dallas. And that we'd owned that piece of property since 1979, and we'd put a building on that property that ultimately became rather derelict. And so we decided, in our wonderful wisdom of our forefathers, we decided to tear that building down and build a brand new building. And it was our pride and joy. And it was about a year and a half old come October 19th of 2019. So it was something that we were really pleased with. I remember Benny, you being there many times and talk about capitalizing on the new car smell that we had in that building. So in any event, yes, and it really was a special place for us.
So I assume you were relaxing on a Sunday night like the rest of us and woke up Monday morning to a phone call that the building was damaged. Take us through that. What was your intake of information on that, and what was your initial response of what to do next?
Well, we knew that there had been some significant damage in the North Dallas area. We just didn't know how significant that really was. Fortunately, we had a person on our team by the name of Jeffrey Williams who really was well connected, but also really was knew his way around. And so he quickly drove over there at about 5 a.m. On the morning after this catastrophic event, and was able to get through the police barriers and everything else, and we found, in effect, a building that was no longer in existence. We had 4 standing walls, but later we found out that from an engineering reports that those were not very viable from an engineering perspective. So the bottom line is Jeffrey was able to assess the damage real early, get the word out to all of us. We then came in as best we could. I remember that day I had to walk about 3/4 of a mile just to simply get into where our building was because of the police perimeters and because of all of the damage that had been done with trees down and electric lines down and everything else. So it was a pretty challenging scene.
So obviously, next steps is obviously there's going to be an insurance claim filed. And here being on the NAPIA podcast, obviously you hired a public insurance adjuster to represent you throughout that process. Had you known what a public insurance adjuster was prior to that storm event taking place?
In all candor, I did not know what a public adjuster did or was, candidly. I knew of one person that was in that business, and that was Benny Wright, the person I'm speaking to right now. And Benny had been a very active volunteer and ambassador of our chamber. In fact, Benny had just won our most energetic volunteer of the year award earlier that year. And he just was a wealth of information, but also a tremendous asset to our chamber in general. But because we knew Benny and we knew his firm, we said, let's talk about what the benefits of using a public adjuster would be relative to just us dealing directly with the insurer.
Hey, Ken, being on board and being on the Chamber of Commerce, I'm sure that you were approached by many different people within that association or within your realm, that everybody's got a friend and everybody knows somebody that can take care of things. Were these some of the type of issues that you were presented with and prior to reaching out and talking to Benny?
You know, actually, we didn't have that many. We had lots of vendors that came to us saying, hey, we'll help you rebuild. Lots of vendors that came and talked about various options that we might have. But the bottom line is, in terms of actually adjudicating our claim, we really hadn't considered anything other than dealing directly with the insurer or dealing with someone like Benny.
So what were some of the challenges that you had kind of internally immediately following the tornado, aside from maybe specifically hiring a public adjuster? What were some of kind of the operational challenges you had that this storm kind of presented at your doorstep unwarrantedly or unwantedly? Excuse me.
Yeah, of course. So the bottom line was that the first thing we had to do was try to get all of our systems up real quickly, because as long as we could do that, we could continue to operate the way we'd always operated. But we were going to obviously have to do that remotely. And so we were way ahead of the curve relative to the pandemic when the pandemic finally came along, because we had already been working remotely for about 5 months up until that point. But the bottom line is that we did get everything up and running pretty quickly from a IT perspective, but just had to operate out of our homes. But at the same time, we had to continue to provide services to our members and other stakeholders, and continue to do the things that we do so well. And we just could not commit a lot of time and energy with our very small staff to trying to figure out what we needed to do next.
Now, as a active member of the chamber myself, I can give you a testimony on this, that you guys didn't miss a beat in your daily emails that went out shortly after that updated the general membership on the continuity of government, so to speak, and the way the chamber was moving forward was really impressive. And I think it gave people a lot of calm that in an otherwise chaotic time, things are moving just fine. Duck on the pond, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. One other thing, Benny, that I might mention is that the other thing we had to do was we do 150 events a year, and many of those were already on the books, and so we had to find locations to do every one of those events, since they were going to be done hosted right there in our own building, and so our Chief Operating Officer, Jeff Kittner, went and did a masterful job of piecing those out to all of our sponsors and our board members and other entities.
What kind of questions did your office get, or you and your staff get, in the days that followed?
Well, so what are you going to continue to provide this programming? Mm-hmm. What about public advocacy? How are you going to take aggressive positions on important pro-business issues if you're distracted by all of the things that are happening relative to the building? And then how do we maintain connections? How do we keep people together in spite of not having a clubhouse?
So deciding to hire a public adjuster at that time obviously came with some expectations, but it sounds as if you trusted the person, not necessarily the process, having not been very familiar with it. What kind of expectations did you have from your public adjuster and the firm that was coming in to handle this catastrophe for you?
Yeah, well, that's a really valid point, and everything does get down to a people business, and we had complete confidence in you, Benny, just knowing you and what you had provided in terms of service to our chamber for many years. But more importantly, we knew that you weren't going to let us down no matter what happens. You had enough of a passion for our organization that we felt completely confident that whatever you said was going to happen was going to happen. Yeah, and we had our executive committee. I will tell you that when we shared the options of how we were going to deal with this, there were some concerns expressed. But the bottom line was that after thinking it through and all the logic about time management, most importantly, but the benefits were just tremendously overwhelming in favor of utilizing a public adjuster, and specifically Benny Wright.
And that's an interesting point, because you were not able to make this decision unilaterally, right? You had to take it to a committee, and the committee had to approve the decision to bring a firm in to handle this very situation that could make or break your association.
That's exactly right. And the executive committee, the only convincing they needed was they all saw the benefits, but what they needed was convincing that we're going to see a significant return on investment, and that was the real issue, was the financial piece of it. And when a public adjuster, obviously, the only way they can be compensated is through a portion of the insurance proceeds. That made our executive committee say, let's talk about this. How much assurance do we have that we're going to get a benefit from this, a return on that investment? And it became real clear real quickly that it was going to be the right thing for us to do.
So what are some of the things during the claim process? Now, we filed the claim. We haven't necessarily settled it, but there's some time period in there where you guys were looking at potentially operating in a rental space, figuring out how to operate from home, supercharge everybody's internet. You guys were doing Zoom before it was cool in 2020. What's some of the things that you maybe struggled with through that time and kind of kept a sense of calm with during that time, having us handle this for you?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we got a lot of advice from our public adjuster, e.g. you. We got a lot of advice from you about here's some things you need to be thinking about in terms of ensuring that you have good records that are kept relative to any expenses that you incur, because many of these can be reimbursed during this period, this interim period of time. And so, like you said, office rental expense. We also had all of the administrative expenses that would have been just normal in our building. They were all covered expenses, but we wouldn't have known that if it weren't for our public adjuster telling us that. And so that all of those kinds of things came together very nicely, and they really enhanced our return on investment.
So obviously, doing this for quite a while, it's a commonality that people are very concerned, nervous, scared, all the high blood pressure feelings that they go through in this type of situation. It sounds like this turned out really well for you in the end. Did you and that executive committee do kind of an after-action report to say, high five, we did a good job by going this route?
Well, that was the other great thing that came from that experience, is we could track exactly how much we were insured for and how much benefit we got from that, plus all of the ancillary expenses that were incurred that were covered under this plan that we would not have had a clue that we were covered for if it weren't for the public adjuster's involvement in it. But let me say one last thing, and the most important benefit that came from our experience by far was time management. We have a very small staff that really goes in a lot of different directions, and we just could not commit the time to spend doing the kinds of things that you would need to do in order to be properly reimbursed by the insurance company. And that's where the real benefit came in, was that we didn't really think about it. After we hired the public adjuster, we could walk away from that. And yes, we would have ongoing weekly conversations and talk about where we stood on certain issues. But basically, we turned it over to the public adjuster, and we could then do our jobs. And we felt like we did them pretty well considering the circumstances.
Hey, Ken, had you ever had an insurance claim before, either personal or through the Chamber of Commerce?
Not well. I've only been with the Chamber of Commerce for 6 years, and not in my Chamber of Commerce tenure. However, personally, of course, I've had multiple, but I've never had a house claim. So I've only had car claims and things like that.
Yeah, and were you aware of how many different areas of coverage that were included in your policies, and what you needed to be looking for, or what you should be focusing on, or was you just, I've got insurance, so somebody's going to take care of me?
That's a great question, and that is the natural assumption, and that was my assumption. And candidly, that was my assumption going into this claim relative to our building that we lost. It's we had no clue that all of the various coverages that were available, that were incorporated within that policy, we had no clue, and that's why we were so fortunate to have a public adjuster reviewing it for us.
So it sounds like overall, hindsight being 2020, would you do it again?
Kind of, I think I mentioned this too, not only you, but anybody else that's been around. This is what we call a no-brainer. It's really absolutely, we could not be more pleased with the experience and the ultimate financial result, and most importantly, the time management result. All of those just came together very nicely, and so absolutely 100% we'd do it over again.
So, and I appreciate that. And I was honored to go to work for you, team and all. So,
how would you recommend somebody going about finding or locating a public adjuster?
Yeah, I think it gets back to one thing. That's awareness. And so I think public adjusting community and the business has work to do relative to ensuring that the public is aware of what the services you can provide. And so I think that's your biggest challenge. But once people are aware of it and they understand that there is significant return on investment, it's, like I said, a no-brainer.
How did the ultimate success, and in our business, it's a success to you to be fully indemnified in the situation. To the candid ears, it probably sounds a little morbid to say that this is a successful endeavor. But with the success of this claim settlement, how did it change the path of the association moving forward?
Great question. So what happened for us specifically is the combination of the insurance proceeds, as you said, fully indemnified, and more because of the policy pieces of it that we weren't aware of, but fully indemnified, and then coupled that with, after a very diligent process with a very opinionated real estate committee that we had formed, we decided to ultimately sell our land and not rebuild on that land. Well, the combination of the proceeds from both of those transactions have really put us in a really nice financial position, so much so that we've created, in effect, an unrestricted endowment, and then we utilize the appreciation of that endowment to help pay off our current rental real estate expenses.
So your public adjuster was able to come up to you after looking at the policy and give you advice on what would be your best options, laid out several options for you to either A, you can rebuild the building and go back and get recoverable depreciation, which is monies that are withheld until the building is fully repaired, or give you the option of, hey, we're going to walk out here with the actual cash value, and that way you can take this, sell that land, and pool that money to go put something else somewhere else at a different time. That was your public adjuster that allowed you and offered you those opinions and those options in order for which you to move forward.
And I'm glad you brought all that up, because you're reminding me of those conversations, which I had completely lost in my in the cobwebs of my brain. But yes, absolutely, we had ongoing conversations there, and in fact, our public adjuster actually would come and address our real estate committee and talk to our real estate committee about these options, and so and the impact of the indemnification on each of those potential transactions.
If you hadn't just built the building prior, would you have any idea of what the costs associated with repairing that building would be?
No, none. But that's the beauty of it. We did know how much it cost, because we still had all that data from before, and so we could go back in, but there were still, obviously expenses had increased at that point. We had hired a builder to come in, one of our members to come in and actually take a look at the property and see if what we could salvage from the building itself, and get the engineering reports and things like that. And that was a very serious consideration whether we would rebuild. But at the same time, we could eliminate our mortgage and move forward with cash in the bank and go and rent at another location in the same area. So we've been real pleased with the decision.
Yeah, and I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you have those numbers of what it costs to build on a new construction, those don't take into consideration any of your demolition cost or your cleanup costs, or what it's going to cost to tie back into an existing structure should that have been able to be done. So I think that your public adjuster would have come in and written some type of document which would explain all of the different variable in as far as the construction means and the demolition means. I mean, so there's certain areas that you have, and I'm sure that you were hitting some thresholds, and there would be an additional debris removal clause in your policy that would help you along the line for a total loss. It would help you just gain more money to enable to be able to do all of those items, correct?
Absolutely. That's completely right.
So now when you went through the engineering process, was it based on the insurance company sending out an engineer and then getting that engineering report and then reviewing it and saying, well, our engineer had something a little bit different to say? Was that ever a case or a position that they were in?
Benny might have to help me with this a little bit, but we had an engineering report from the insurance company, but I think we also had a third party come in and take a look at it as well that you brought in, and that we were able to compare the two and look at those. And, one of which I think ultimately said those four walls, you could probably retain them. cosmetically they're ruined, but the bottom line is structurally they're okay. And the other one said no, structurally they're not in good shape, and so you should consider just demoing the whole thing.
Yeah, so the public adjuster was able to bring in additional resources to help him, and then maybe give you the best advice and say, hey, listen, which way would you like us to proceed? Are you good with these four walls are being up, or we've got the guy saying it totally needs to be torn down, and that's our belief that we believe that should happen, and we're gonna press that and try to hold the insurance company accountable.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay, Ken. So to recap. Kind of what had the discussion we were talking about. The benefits of hiring a public adjuster would be, the time management, having the public adjuster there so that you could operate and function as a business and not have to worry about having to set aside time to go meet with all the insurance companies and personnel and inspections and things of that nature. Relying on the knowledgeability of the public adjuster, finding out, hey, listen, this is where we've got in our policies. This is what you've got as coverage. This is pointing out areas that you didn't know that you were aware of, and policy interpretation, meaning, again, going back in, finding out what the coverages you have, what the coverages you don't have, letting you know and be informed to make the decisions in order to get the claim properly settled and resolved, correct?
I think that's right on, Tim. I think, and in that order, too. The time piece of it was the most important thing for us, but I'm sure it's going to be different for everyone else, for others. But the other thing that I would say is I would take 1, 2, and 3 that you just mentioned and say that equals also a great financial outcome.
Well, Ken, I want to sincerely thank you for a number of things. One, your trust and your friendship, for one. For two, your leadership at the North Dallas Chamber. You guys have been an absolute powerhouse of influence in the North Texas region for many, many years. I know specifically my business has significantly benefited from the relationships and the platforms you guys have provided, and I really appreciate that. But thirdly, I want to say thank you very much for being our first kickoff interview series for the NAPIA Podcast. It's an honor to have you. It was an honor to work for you. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. And thank you on behalf of Tim and I both for taking the time to be here and tell us your story.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Benny. We really appreciate all you do, and really appreciate the industry that you represent. It's really such a positive influence in the community, and we really appreciate that. So, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, thank you, and NAPIA thanks you as well. So I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tim.